Wind's coming down here, so they shouldn't be able to smell us if we stay behind.
For decades, Tom Orr lived by one rule: endure whatever the Yak River country demanded. Harsh winters, isolation, and unforgiving terrain shaped his life and his legend. But by the time he reached 79, the challenge was no longer the wilderness around him. It was the realization that even a lifetime of resilience has limits, and his body was the one battle he could no longer win. The morning Tom finally could not rise.
I was in love with Tom. We were having fun. We were young and strong.
Dawn spread across the Yak River Valley, as it always did, sharp, uncaring, and quietly beautiful. Tom Orr woke to the familiar sight of rough-cut ceiling beams above him, the cabin he had raised with his own hands nearly half a century before. The stove would need tending, water buckets waited to be filled, the horses would be ready for feed. But that morning, for the first time in 50 years of mountain life, Tom could not get out of bed. It was not paralysis or a sudden accident. It was heavier than that. The pain was everywhere, stacked layer upon layer, impossible to ignore. His shoulders, worn down by decades of saws and axes, flared with fire when he tried to shift. His knees, consumed by endless miles of unforgiving ground, refused to bend without stabbing resistance. His hands, gnarled by arthritis from years of working hides in freezing water, would not close. Even sitting up felt unreachable. Nancy came in 20 minutes later and stopped short. The expression on Tom's face told her everything. She had witnessed injuries, sickness, and moments that should have taken his life. She had never seen him look defeated. Tom, her voice trembled despite herself. "Just give me a minute," he murmured, though they both knew minutes would not change this. This was not soreness or exhaustion. This was a lifetime of borrowed strength demanding repayment. It took 40 minutes to bring him upright. 40 minutes of careful, painful motions, every movement dragged out through breathless groans he could no longer hide. Nancy helped as best she could, even as her own 76-year-old body protested with each lift and shift. Together they moved slowly through a cabin that once rang with purpose, now quiet and strained. There were no cameras. The crews were gone, back to cities filled with doctors and warmth. This moment belonged only to Tom and Nancy, and to the reality of a body breaking far from help. When Tom finally reached the porch, much of the morning had slipped away. The horses waited by the fence, unsettled by the broken routine. Chores that once took an hour now threatened to consume the entire day, if they could be done at all. Tom leaned there, breath ragged after walking 30 feet, and stared across the land that had shaped him. The mountains did not respond. The forest did not pause. Winter was coming, as always, and the wilderness had never known compassion. Tom had forged his identity around endurance. Rodeo rider, mountain man, a life spent proving he could withstand more than most. But even endurance has a boundary, and the mountain was crossing it. Nancy stepped beside him and slid her hand into his. She said nothing. She did not need to. The silence spoke clearly. The life they had built was ending, and for the first time, pretending otherwise was no longer possible. When the body turns against you.
Wind's coming down here, so they shouldn't be able to smell us if we stay behind.
The decline had not arrived all at once. Tom Orr could see that now, looking backward with the sharp clarity that only a true crisis provides. The warnings had appeared gradually, layering themselves quietly over the years. Each one had been dismissed, rationalized, or pushed aside, because acknowledging them meant confronting something Tom had never allowed himself to accept. About 3 years earlier, his sense of balance began to falter. Crossing creeks on fallen logs, something he had done countless times without a second thought, suddenly demanded concentration. He blamed wet bark, fading light, or tired eyes, anything except the truth. The internal compass that had protected him in hostile country, the instinctive coordination that kept him alive, was slipping. 2 years after that, Nancy found him seated in the workshop, staring at a leather project that was only half finished. His hands would not respond. The stitching that once came naturally, the skill that brought respect far beyond the Yak Valley, had turned clumsy and painful. His fingers trembled, needles slid away. "Just worn out," he told her. "Tomorrow will be better." Tomorrow never came. The piece stayed where it was, silent proof of what had changed. Then, last winter brought a deeper fear. While cutting firewood in brutal cold, work that usually warmed him, despite the temperature, his body failed him. Heat would not hold. Circulation lagged. A dangerous chill settled deep inside, untouched by movement. Nancy found him confused, speech slurred, his temperature dropping even though he was dressed properly. She brought him inside and warmed him slowly, avoiding the hospital only because winter roads made travel nearly impossible. That moment frightened them, in a way storms and animals never had. The threat was no longer outside. It was inside, and toughness could not defeat it. Medical problems followed. Blood pressure surged unpredictably. His heart skipped and raced. His joints deteriorated faster than simple arthritis could explain, worn down by decades of relentless strain. Reaching a doctor meant a long, hazardous drive that became riskier each year as Tom's endurance faded. The doctors did not soften their words. His body showed the toll of a lifetime of extreme labor with little rest. "You have to slow down," one said. "Your body cannot keep up." Tom nodded, then ignored it. Slowing down had never been an option. The wilderness took everything or nothing, and Tom had always given more. But standing in his cabin, with a body that would no longer obey, he faced a truth willpower could not erase. He could force himself upright, attempt the day's work. What he could not do was rebuild cartilage, restore circulation, or undo decades of damage. Nancy had seen it coming. The hesitation before simple movements, the longer recoveries, the injuries that lingered. She had tried to speak years earlier. He had refused. Leaving meant defeat. It meant surrendering the life that defined him. The morning he could not rise changed everything. Nearly 50 years she had followed him into hardship, sharing his belief in independence. Now she was ready to insist, not because she feared the mountains, but because she could no longer watch him die for pride. The next emergency might allow no rescue. The next winter might be unforgiving. The conversation they had avoided could not wait, and beginning it meant facing a truth more frightening than any wilderness threat they had ever known. The choice Nancy never wanted to face.
Had a gin pole to put him up and come-alongs to crank him up poles to get him in place.
Nancy Orr had never been a woman who made demands. As a young bride, she followed Tom Orr into the wilderness, setting aside her family's fears and the warnings of friends who insisted the mountains would consume her. She adjusted without complaint to a life that stripped away comfort and predictability. She learned to tan hides until her hands split, preserve food without refrigeration, endure long stretches of isolation, and accept that medical help was always distant, if it came at all. She never asked for easier circumstances. She never asked Tom to be less than who he was. But watching him struggle through that morning's chores changed something inside her. His movements were slow and rigid, each action measured and painful. Feeding the horses left him short of breath. Carrying buckets required frequent rests. She understood then that love sometimes means protecting someone from themselves, even when they resist with everything they have. That afternoon, she found him in the barn, leaning against a post, his face pale with exhaustion. Simple work that once showed his strength had taken him 3 hours. Winter was still months away, yet already he was drained. Nancy's thoughts raced to deep snow, sub-zero nights, endless firewood, and water hauled from the creek. "We need to talk," she said, her voice edged in a way Tom rarely heard. "A real talk, not you brushing this aside." Tom met her gaze, defiance mixed with resignation. He had known the moment was coming, even as he avoided naming it. "The mountain isn't the problem," he said out of a habit. "I just need to slow down, maybe get help with the heavy work."
"There is no help out here, Tom," Nancy replied, her voice cracking. "We've always been alone. That worked when we were strong enough. We're not anymore." She stepped closer. "What happens if you get hypothermia again and I can't warm you? If your heart acts up in winter and the road's impassable? If I get hurt and you can't help because your body won't respond?"
Tom tried to interrupt, but she continued, years of fear finally released. "I've watched you decline for 3 years. You move slower. You hurt more. This morning you couldn't even get out of bed. How bad does it have to be?" The silence weighed on them. Tom searched for an argument, but pain and exhaustion answered instead. "This is our life," he said softly. "This place is who I am." Nancy's eyes filled with tears. "You're my husband. You're the man I've shared 50 years with. You are not this mountain. I need you alive more than I need you proving anything." She took his hands, feeling the damage that mirrored her own. "We live the life we chose. There's no shame in admitting our bodies can't keep up." "Where would we go?" Tom asked, surrender in his voice. "There's a small place near Troy," Nancy said. "Still rural, close to doctors, modest, but affordable. We'd still have mountains, Tom. We just wouldn't have to fight them every day." To Tom, it sounded like defeat. A smaller house, a quieter life. He had imagined dying on this land. But the fear in Nancy's face stopped him. "The show," he said weakly. "Mountain men." "The show isn't our life," Nancy replied gently. "It's only pictures of it. If we can't actually live here anymore, there's no show anyway." He knew she was right. Holding on felt worse than letting go. "Can I have time to think?" he asked.
No, Nancy said softly. We've had years. If we wait longer, we won't have choices. We'll have emergencies.
And for the first time in 50 years, Tom Orr understood that the bravest act was not surviving one more winter, but choosing to leave while he still could. Winter's last warning.
And I heard that sucker crack. There it is, right there.
Tom spent the following 2 weeks trying to prove Nancy wrong. Each day he threw himself into his routines with renewed resolve, forcing his body through pain and exhaustion to show that mountain life was still within his grasp. He split firewood until his hands cracked and bled. He worked on the cabin while his joints screamed in protest. He pushed through the physical demands of the wilderness as if determination alone could undo years of biological wear. Nancy watched without interference. She understood that sometimes a person must reach the end of their strength before accepting the truth. While Tom made his final stand against reality, she prepared quietly for departure, researching modest properties near Troy, packing essentials for a life they never planned, and deciding what might be sold and what they would carry forward. That year, winter arrived early, almost as if the mountain itself wanted to deliver its own verdict. Snow fell in late September, months ahead of schedule, covering the land in a heavy, unfamiliar silence. When Tom saw the white ground outside the cabin, fear tightened in his chest. If this winter followed the same pattern, his body would not endure it. He managed one full day of winter chores before his body failed outright. The cold inflamed his arthritis beyond tolerance. His circulation could not keep his extremities warm despite layers of clothing. By evening, he was hypothermic again, shaking violently even beside the fire. Nancy treated him with calm efficiency, but her expression was resolute. This was the confirmation neither of them wanted, yet both understood. When Tom could finally speak, surrender came easily. "All right." Nancy looked up, steady. "All right, what?"
All right, we go. You're right. I can't survive another winter. I can barely survive another week.
Relief crossed Nancy's face, followed by tears she had restrained for years. They held each other in the cabin they had built together, grieving the life that was ending. With the decision made, practical matters followed. Selling the remote property, finding a place near Troy, sorting through 5 decades of tools and possessions built for mountain survival, and telling the Mountain Men production team that their chapter was closing. That conversation was harder than Tom expected. The show had become part of who they were, but the producers understood. They had seen his declining mobility and knew continuing could lead to tragedy.
We'd like to film your departure, the production manager suggested. Show there's no shame in knowing when to step back.
Tom resisted at first, but Nancy persuaded him. "People need to see this too," she said. So the cameras returned one last time, capturing not endurance, but acceptance. Tom walked the land, sharing memories and stories, knowing each step away carried a piece of himself with it. When asked if he regretted the life he lived, Tom paused. "No regrets about coming here," he said, "only that I didn't leave before my body forced the choice." The choice between pride and survival. The land changed hands sooner than Tom expected. A younger couple, both in their 40s, connected to it immediately. They had the strength, skills, and desire to live the same demanding life Tom and Nancy once embraced. Watching them walk the property with confidence felt like looking back through time, seeing reflections of who Tom and Nancy had been decades earlier. Tom felt a surge of emotion as he guided them around the land, explaining the cabin's workings, pointing out reliable water sources during dry months, and warning them about the stretches where grizzlies often crossed. Nearly 50 years of hard-earned knowledge was being transferred in a single afternoon. His life's work was no longer his alone. "Take care of her," Tom said during the signing, and everyone understood he meant the mountain itself. The new owner, a former Marine with experience in Afghanistan, nodded calmly. "We'll respect what you built." Packing stretched on for weeks. 5 decades of tools, memories, and necessities were separated into piles for keeping, selling, donating, or leaving behind. Tom stored his leather tools even though his hands could no longer use them. Nancy gave her preserving equipment to younger homesteaders who could still rely on it through winter. The hardest things to part with were the quiet ones. Old photographs of them young and strong, Letters from family members long gone. Tom's first buckskin jacket, too fragile to wear, too meaningful to discard. These went into boxes bound for their new home, fragments of a life that could not be fully carried forward. The cameras documented everything: empty rooms, final walks, goodbyes spoken without words. Tom's narration lacked bravado, replaced by honesty that was harder but truer. "People will say I failed," Tom admitted on camera. "Maybe I did. I said I'd live here until I died, and I left alive. But dying from stubbornness when you still have choices isn't courage." Nancy spoke separately. "I never wanted to take this from him," she said, "but I'd rather have my husband alive than legendary." Their move near Troy offered comfort instead of conquest. Electricity, reliable heat, medical care. It felt both safe and humiliating. Tom struggled at first. Without constant survival demands, he felt adrift. Nancy encouraged new routines, new community, new purpose. Slowly, his body improved. Pain eased, stability returned, but identity lagged behind. When asked who he was now, Tom still hesitated. He was no longer defined by the mountain, and learning who he could be without it was the hardest work he had ever done. Leaving the mountain that forged him. The final chapter of Tom Orr's Mountain Men journey aired on a cold November night. Tom and Nancy sat side by side in their new living room, fingers intertwined, watching the familiar images play across a space that still felt borrowed. On the screen, the cameras closed out a wilderness life that had shaped nearly 50 years of who they were. The production team chose restraint, presenting the moment not as collapse or defeat, but as transition, the natural end of an extraordinary and demanding season. The response was immediate and sharply divided. Some viewers felt abandoned, as though Tom had broken an unspoken vow to remain forever wild, unyielding, untouched by age. Online voices accused him of quitting, of abandoning the image they believed in, of proving that the mountain man persona had always been an act. Those reactions hurt, not because they were new, but because they revealed how deeply people had wrapped fantasy around a life that was always human, fragile, and finite. Yet another response surfaced, quieter but heavier. Letters arrived from men and women in their 70s and 80s who said Tom's decision helped them face their own limits. One wrote that seeing Tom step back convinced him to finally use the walker his doctor insisted on, realizing pride had nearly cost him his life. Others shared stories of leaving family land, downsizing homes, or accepting care they had resisted for years. These messages unsettled Tom. He had never wanted to inspire through vulnerability. Strength had always meant endurance. Nancy reminded him that choosing life over image required a different kind of courage, one many people never found. 6 months after leaving the mountain, an unexpected invitation arrived. The younger couple who bought the property asked Tom to visit and see what they had done. His instinct was refusal. Returning felt like reopening something that had barely begun to close. Nancy gently encouraged him, understanding that some endings require revisiting the place where the line was crossed. They returned in spring. Snow had melted away, and the valley lay open and green. The bend where a blizzard nearly took him decades earlier. The meadow where they once watched a wolverine disappear at dusk. The cabin stood familiar, but changed. Solar panels caught the light. Fences were reinforced. Horses moved calmly through the pasture. The wilderness continued without him. Instead of grief, Tom felt calm. The mountain did not need him to remain authentic. The life they lived there did not lose meaning because it ended. Others would take on the work, face the same risks, and one day meet their own limits. His chapter mattered without having to continue forever. During the visit, the new owner asked the question Tom expected. Did he regret leaving? Tom looked at Nancy, at nights no longer broken by pain, at days free from constant fear of medical emergency. "I regret my body giving out," he said honestly. "I regret not staying as long as I wanted. But I don't regret leaving when we did. Another winter could have killed me." He paused before adding, "When I was younger, I thought toughness meant never stopping. Getting older taught me that real toughness is knowing when to stop." That understanding did not arrive easily. Some mornings he still felt angry at his body for betraying him. Limitations frustrated him in ways his younger self could never have imagined. But slowly, acceptance replaced resistance. Life moved in seasons, and wisdom lay in recognizing when one had ended. Tom agreed to appear in occasional updates for the show. They were not survival spectacles, but honest reflections of transition. Viewers responded powerfully. There was strength in watching someone live truthfully instead of performing endlessly. Tom and Nancy settled into routines once unimaginable to their younger selves. Morning coffee on the porch, afternoons of leather work done slowly within what his hands allowed, evenings with neighbors, building community instead of surviving isolation. His craft became teaching rather than production. His hands no longer worked as before, but they still guided and passed on knowledge. Nancy thrived in unexpected ways. Freed from constant vigilance, she rediscovered longest set-aside interests: quilting, painting, community involvement. Her identity expanded beyond endurance into something fully her own. In an interview a year later, Tom was asked if leaving meant losing himself. "I learned I was more than the mountains," he said. "For 50 years, that's who I was. Leaving forced me to find out who I am without them. Turns out I'm still a husband, a teacher, a storyteller." 2 years after leaving, Tom returned once more. Walking the land felt like visiting a former life. Trails remained, but other boots followed them now. The wilderness went on, unmoved. As the sun dropped behind the valley, Nancy asked about regrets. Tom answered quietly, "I wish I'd left sooner, before my body forced it. But no regrets about the life we lived. No regrets about choosing you." They left the next morning without looking back. The mountain had given him purpose and challenge. He had given it 50 years of strength. Now, at 79, Tom Orr was no longer proving anything. He understood that survival is not only about endurance, that wisdom sometimes looks like surrender, and that true mastery is knowing when a chapter has been fully lived. The mountain remained vast and indifferent. Tom found peace not by conquering it, but by walking away whole. And that is where Tom Orr's story truly settles. Not in defeat, and not in legend, but in honesty. A life measured not by how long he endured the mountain, but by knowing when to leave it behind with dignity. His journey reminds us that strength is not only shown in holding on, but also in letting go before holding on costs too much. The wilderness shaped him, but it did not own him. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments, and stay with us for more untold moments from lives shaped by survival, sacrifice, and the courage to choose what comes next.